Hi Thunderfoot, I'm blogTV. I've never made a response video like this before. I want to make this video very quickly. It's just going to be my voice, maybe I'll put a graph in there, but I want to make this very fast. Remember Thunderfoot, in none of this video I'm making any claims about you. Remember, I'm a big fan. But I was watching your blogTV on the 10th, and you kept asking Shredder and other people a critical question that's more, I think, a historical question than a scientific one. You kept asking why don't Islamic countries, the Islamic world, the Arab world, whatever, why don't they make as many scientific papers as the West? You kept trying to push an answer that it was religion, and if that somehow you can change either the amount of people who believe in the religion or the effect of religion on the society, then more scientific papers will come out. Now, I'm not a scientist. My brother is. He researches particle physics at Stanford, but I'm trying to become a historian. And one thing about the historical profession that's not the same thing as the scientific profession. We both attempt to make hypotheses and give theories. It's much harder to prove these theories. Just like science, there are ages in which many historians give simplistic and bad answers, and they are outgrown and outmoded by newer historical arguments. An argument saying that the cause for the non-scientific activity of any people, Africa, I don't know, China, the West, whatever, saying it's just religion is overly simplistic. In many ways, modern science is only 400 years old, and that is not a long time. And let me become a little more detailed in this. Francis Bacon invented the scientific method in around 1600. Even though one society is able to advance very fast in historical time, no matter what the other society is, you cannot expect it to perform in exactly the same way. 100 years ago, historians were debating amongst themselves, why is the West superior to every other country in any dimension? In health, health, science, education, civilization, whatever. Now, back in 1900, you'd get a bunch of racist answers, because that was the climate of the situation. These arguments were essentially accepted until many historians, from the West and from the rest, kind of dislodged this notion that you could find one reason for every single historical occurrence. And it's not. It's not like in science where you can create a formula with several variables and say, this is how electromagnetism works. We can create a theory. In history, there's always 6 billion variables. As many people as there are, as many religions and governments and institutions, social networks and families and social structures, that's how many variables there are. You can't condense the actions of everything into one cogent idea. You can try to create what's called a super theory, which is an approximation of the general trend of history that many hypotheses will make up. But super theories really don't work. The old super theory we had was called diffusionism, which is what I was talking about. Everyone used to think that because people used to think God appointed Greater Europe, which is the Middle East, like the Bible lands, Rome, Greece, England, France. They populated that place with the best race, and they created all science and all the progress came from Europe and diffused everywhere else. Later on, the God-appointed race idea sank away, and they tried to use science and historical arguments to replace it, but it didn't work. This theory is not in use anymore. But remember, it's only not been in use for around 70 years. People in the 40s were still thinking this. History's undergone a huge revolution in the 20th century. So has science. Remember, people in 1900 with no scientific basis at all believed in eugenics. And today, even though eugenics is wholly discredited, a few people still believe in that. You still got people believing in creationist crap, which I know you know about. You can't expect everything to change in 70 years, which is the crux of what I'm trying to say. So let me make my historical argument after all this rambling. Remember that video you made, which is my favorite video? It was the second one in your playlist of videos for creationists. It's like I forget the title, but it's the one where you compare biblical science and science. And you made this point in the video: modern technology, 1000 AD. And you essentially showed some agricultural tools and crap. And you say modern technology, 2000 AD. And you make the comparison. A very important comparison. What you need to understand is that what you showed in 1000 AD except for very specific places on Earth. A few places in England, a few places in North China, a few places in Southern China, maybe a couple places in Japan. Some people say Southeast Asia, a couple places in Africa, almost a few places in the Middle East. In the Middle East, and what used to be the Caliphate. It wasn't different. In 1700, you had the same crap. Maybe a little better, but just as worthless. Science has only had around 300 or 400 years to maneuver. It's a new and revolutionary idea that not everybody's going to pick up. This is what, I always try to make my brother understand this, who is obsessed, who is obsessed with this idea that science is kind of a completely obvious and natural feeling that everyone would seek to discover. This isn't true. I think the impetus for survival, finding ways to survive, finding ways to become more prosperous are a little more important to people. You got to remember people like Galileo. It took a special kind of guy to make a telescope and actually point it up at the sky. This isn't an obvious thing to do. You remember the Venetians who gave him the money for the telescope, gave him the money so that they'd be able to use that telescope to look for ships coming into the Venetian port so they can spot them better. The impetus for science is money. For money. I mean, think about how hard it is for scientists like you to get a research grant. It's even harder for historians like me. Because, as you know, very few people care out there. In the history of science, you have one or two clergymen that start, like Kepler, who have the time, the money, and the resources, and the ability to research without having to farm. And for 250 years, the progress of science is condensed to aristocrats and very rich bourgeoisie in France. I mean, Lavoisier was not a farmer who went to university. He was a nobleman who stole this idea from Joseph Priestley. He had the money and all the scientific tools to experiment with oxygen and gases and weights. And he had the time to write 100,000 books so he can publish this thing. And the only people that read those books were more aristocrats and more people that had the time and the ability to research these things. And they actually felt the need. There aren't that many people out there, for many reasons, that would devote their entire life, like Dalton, to measuring like the average rainfall amount every day for his entire life, for essentially a 1% chance of producing something that's actually going to be worthwhile. Even the idea that somebody who's not a rich guy, somebody who doesn't come from a pampered family, somebody like me or you, could go to a university for a reasonable fee, research this thing, and get a job as a professor and a researcher. That idea itself is only 100 years old. And that's in the West, the most, advanced place out there. You cannot expect a place less advanced to catch up instantly in 100 or 50 years. Now, saying that, why is everyone else behind us? Now, remember going back to what I said. Back in 1750, pretty much everyone was on a level playing field. There was no science as we know it. Any invention made was just to perpetuate survival. We have a few agricultural revolutions in England. We have some commercial revolutions so people will make more money. But this was just advancements for more food and more money. You didn't really have the majority of people, maybe one guy in the entire planet, but you didn't have the majority of people researching what made atoms. You had Newton with gravity, but how many people did that? 4 or 5. Science doesn't become a respected thing until around the 18th century, when it's coupled with the rise of capitalism in England and the wealth of, I don't want to say it, but Western nations, to actually make some progress in it. Think about all the technological advancements the West has made due to governments throwing billions and billions and billions of dollars at research projects like the Manhattan Project, at CERN, at Fermilab. This simply could not exist in economies that could not produce this amount of money. The first economies that could produce this kind of money were in England because of the Industrial Revolution. Now, what caused the Industrial Revolution? There's a lot of answers, and I don't really have time to go into the historiography of every single answer that's been said why the Industrial Revolution happened. The best argument today, that isn't a completely racist one, is that England was in such a rare position of having enough specific types of agricultural expansion and economic expansion and regional diversities and interest in markets that it was able to develop into an industrial revolution and develop into a capitalistic revolution. in the 1750s when nobody else did. And this occurrence is so rare. It's almost a shock that it happened in England. It almost didn't happen, and if it didn't, we'd all be serfs right now. Now imagine societies where this didn't happen, which is much more easier to do. It's just luck. With the advancement of the Industrial Revolution and the history of capitalism, you have the ability for researchers to make more science. Science becomes more profitable. Europe is able to dominate the rest of the world, politically, economically, and socially. And remember, we have all those empires and all the colonies that were made out there. Every other country in the world that had science introduced to it essentially had science along with technology and imperialism imposed on them. For 100-something years, Europe dominated the rest of the world with these colonies. And these colonies were not conducive to science. Colonies were essentially designed, until pretty much the very end when it was too late to fix anything, were designed to extract resources and money. They were not really designed, even though they said they were going to be designed, to better the people. When they built roads in the colonies, they built roads to the mine plants. They didn't build roads so that the citizens could go to university. They didn't make it. They tried to reorder the society so that they could get a rich elite in the colonies, train them in the mother country, so that they can rule over the colony. This happened for 100 years. For 100 years, any scientific advancement by anybody in the colonies came from people that had to go to England or France to go to universities just so they can get some money to do some damn research. Think of Marie Curie, who came from Poland, which wasn't a colonized country, in 1800 you could say it was. Even she had to go to France before she can do anything. All the Indian mathematicians, all the Muslim poets and literary thinkers and political thinkers and economic thinkers, every single one of them had to go to England and go to France to get degrees and do research. There was no reason to do the research in the colonies and in places like Africa or the Middle East or even Asia, because there was no money, no ability to do any research, and all the people that were doing it were in England. This system survived for 100-something years, for around 150 years. Islam and all the other places in the world, for much of their history, were not allowed to progress. This is called the theory of underdevelopment, if you want to look it up. And remember, in history, causes for these are being constantly researched. It's not just one thing. Now, around the 50s and 60s, we find these countries, which are broke, destroyed, colonized, still dependent on European structures and institutions imposed on them. Countries with citizens just allowed rights, citizens that have no real ability to even get enough food for their families, let alone go to university. They are suddenly thrust into a position where they can create universities and all these things, but with no resources to do it. Now, some countries are able to push through. Japan's able to push through. Kuwait's able to push through. You can even say Iran is able to push through. But in the end, why hasn't there been progress since 1950? You can say it has to do with the political instability. It has to do with the fact that the university structure is still, in many ways, as it was. You can't go to the University of Waziristan and expect as good enough education as you would in the University at the Sorbonne and the University of Cambridge. This situation has not changed. And in order to change that, you got to build universities and have billions of dollars of funding, which these countries simply do not have. You also have dictators and wars and religious strife and all these other things holding these nations back. You'd also need to engage in science. Research in science is not the natural thing to do. Think about the Enlightenment. There's a historian named Robertson who made a pretty good argument about the Enlightenment. He said countries with specific needs had different kinds of enlightenment. The Scots and Naples. Naples was a country back then. Pretty much two economically subpar countries that were within these broader monarchies. And their main issue was how do we become as rich as England? So most of their Enlightenment thinking was geared toward making more money. It wasn't geared toward science. It wasn't geared toward removing religion. Most of the work of the Islamic countries or the former post-colonial countries are to bring back a sense of historical importance, because that was pretty much destroyed in the colonial era. Bring in a sense of nationalism, a sense of pride, because that's lacking. Give them some more money. I don't think many of them are even thinking about science. You also have this huge religious backlash. I'll admit it's a problem, but it's not the only problem. There are cultural reasons. There are religious reasons, socio-political reasons, economic reasons. They're all just as important. You cannot say without without writing yourself into this argumentative morass that one problem is more important than the others.